Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Hager number 1250 3.5 USP prime coat spring-loaded hinge. And the Hager 1250 is their standard single-acting spring hinge. This happens to be the 3.5, and this happens to be in the USP prime coat finish. There's your UL stamping that's on there. Hager logo as well. Okay, so while 3.5 is less common, of course, compared to 4.5 for us to sell, nonetheless, if you have an 1 3/8 door and you need something to be self-closing, and you're going to paint the hinge, this would be a good option for you to consider for your project. Okay, so let's dissect the part number 1250. That means that it's a single-acting spring hinge, and that it is a standard commercial weight on the leaf. Available in different finishes, naturally. Hager can do this hinge, and I'm going to pull up the other finishes now. Obviously, prime coat, they can do US 10 satin bronze, US 10A, which is their antique bronze lacquered, US 10B, which would be an oil rubbed bronze. They can do a US 2060 satin chrome, US 26 polished chrome certainly, US 3 polished brass, US 4 satin brass, US prime coat again here. And I'm sure that Hager can do this in your nickels, satin nickel, antique nickel as well. That's just not listed in the book. According to the extended description down below, this is a UL listed full mortise single acting spring hinge made of steel. Square corner for 1 3/8 thick doors. And when they say 3.5, the height is the first dimension in a hinge. And that's important to know because not all hinges are square. 3.5, and when it's laid open in front of you, it's 3.5 inches well. Back to the height, the first dimension is the height on a hinge. Important to know if you're dealing with a spring hinge requirement for a 4.5 by 4. That would not be necessarily uncommon, but the height is the first dimension, the 4.5. Or if you have a wide throw hinge, that's 5 by 8. It's important to know it's not 8 inch tall, it's 5 inch tall. A hinge like this is going to be appropriate for 40-pound doors if you have 2 spring hinges. Up to 70-pound doors, go with, 40-pound doors, 1 spring hinge. 70-pound doors, 2 spring hinges. And if you push into the 90-pound range, I suppose you could have a 3070 solid core 1 3/8 door. You'd want 3 spring hinges in that sort of application. For automatic closing of doors, meets codes of hotels, motels, institutions, and commercial buildings. If you're going to install this with ball bearing hinges, which would be what you'd want to use if you're not using all spring hinges, which would be typical. You're not going to use all spring hinges. Put this at the bottom first, and then the second hinge location. Put your ball bearing hinge for sure up at the top, because the top hinge really carries about 70% of the door weight, of the door's weight is all carried by that top hinge. And spring hinges are technically not load bearing, so bottom and then middle would be the route that you'd want to go with that. Now, there are some documents down below this video: template, installation instructions, and product catalog. Let's look at the product catalog first. What you'll find there are all of their spring hinges. The important ones to really know are summarized on those 2 hinges, 2 pages. The 1250, if you're looking for a standard spring hinge, that's going to be the one you want. Very occasionally, you're going to need one made of stainless steel because you have a coastal application. Well, that'd be an 1150 spring hinge that you want. And then you do get into requirements to have a 5/8 or 1/4 inch radius. You'll see that on residential wood doors. The tables on page 1 list those different hinges. They list the sizes that they're available in, and then the table by which their use is recommended in terms of door thickness compared against size of the hinge, the door weight, okay, and how many hinges you'll use based on those requirements. You do occasionally, on page 2, fall into the need for a reverse acting spring hinge, which would be the 1257. If you literally want to close a door and then have that door open when you release the latch, they have a reverse spring hinge. Not uncommon to find that in office environments that need to be normally open, except when the door is closed. That means the door is closed, privacy. But that door can be opened with a reverse spring hinge. That's the 1257. There's even a swing clear spring hinge, which is admittedly something I don't sell often, but swing clear hinges can be very are very often used when you need to comply with handicap compliance. 32-inch clear opening, and when you use a spring hinge to move that door out of the way of the clear opening to maintain or to achieve a 32-inch clear opening mandated by Americans with Disabilities Act, that swing clear can work really well, whether it be in a residential application because you just have a physical need to move through an opening, or you want to move the door out of the opening, but you want it to be self-closing. Okay. Now, the next document, installation instructions and template. Let's look at the template first. All that's going to give you are all of the dimensional properties. If you are replacing an existing hinge, by all means review that to make sure that you're satisfied with the location of the screw holes in relationship to where your existing is. And this hinge, speaking of those holes, will come with all wood and all machine screws. So you'll get 8 of each for each, 6 of each for each hinge that you have. There's probably more than 6 in here because 4-inch or 4.5 or larger hinges will have at least 4 holes. The 3.5s will have 3 holes. This is what's called a template pattern. Template is the standard pattern for commercial applications, but by no means the only pattern. There could be another 10 patterns of this stuff, of the location of the holes, so be absolutely mindful to double check that. If what you have do not match that, reach out to us. We'll help you find the right hinge location for the holes, for the screws, to match what you to match your existing requirements. Or, you know, what I've done in the past is I've doweled the holes, I've drilled them clear and clean, I've inserted a dowel rod with glue, let that set, remortise the hinge so that the dowel rods are flush, and then re-drill and install my hinge. So that would work. The location for the holes are there regardless of the series of 1250 that you're using when you're dealing with a 3.5-inch by 3.5-inch hinge. Now, the installation instructions are really the business end of what we're going to talk about. The Hager system, when it comes to setting the tension, is quite simple. You have a hole at one end. You don't have it at the other end. It only exists on one end. When this hole, which allows access to what's called the tension collar, you're going to install that with it pointed to the top. It doesn't have to be to the top, but in this example, when the tension collar is towards the top of the door, you'll insert the tension rod, or in Hager's case, an Allen wrench, right into the top of there, and you'll turn it clockwise. As you turn it clockwise, you're going to reveal new additional holes in the tension collar. Okay, oh, I just need to... As I do that, I'm increasing spring tension. Into one of those holes, you're going to drop a tension pin. For every hinge that you order, you'll get a tension pin. For every order that you place, you'll get at least 1 tension rod. This client ordered 3 spring hinges, so there are 3 tension pins and 1 tension rod. The installation instructions, now that we've gone over the orientation of it, let's go over step 1. Install bearing hinge at the top with the spring hinges center and bottom, or bottom and center. There should be at least a 1/4-inch clearance at the bottom of the door for vacuum relief. Yeah, absolutely. If your door, I've never, really expressed this much in the past, but if you have a door that's incredibly tight to the frame, you do need air to move, that you're pushing the air into the opening. You do want that to evacuate out the other side so the door can close. And you'll notice that pressure conditions, as they change over the course of an annual cycle of a year, the ability or the need to modify the tension set on the springs will continue to evolve as well. In the summertime when the windows are open, well, that door is going to crash closed. In the wintertime, everything's buttoned up. You might need to increase that spring tension to get those doors to close a little bit better. It has everything to do with that vacuum relief that they're speaking of. Step 2, open the door by hand to 90 degree and then push it closed. If the door latches, the hinges are ready to receive tension. If there's any resistance and the door does not latch, this indicates the door is either out of balance or misaligned. This condition will have to be corrected before tension can be applied to the spring hinges. So if you don't have a door that's mechanically healthy, if it's not latching without any spring tension, the springs are not a good idea to try to force that to latch. So mitigate that problem first. You might have a door that's physically hitting the jamb, you might have a latch and a strike plate that are misaligned, or you might have parts that are worn and simply need to be replaced. So be mindful of making sure that everything works before you start to set spring tension. The door weight should not exceed the recommendations, which includes all the hardware. Not just the door weight. If you've got a large kick plate on the door, which could weigh 10 pounds, and you have a lock set, which is going to weigh 4 pounds, calculate all of that stuff. And that table it varies from what the extended description says a bit, but this goes to 60 pounds, use one center hinge, one spring hinge in the center location, and 2 ball bearing hinges. Center and bottom, up to 85-pound doors, and 3 hinges for doors that are 110 pounds. Those are the guidelines that you're going to follow. If you're ever in doubt of how many spring hinges to use, one spring hinge I don't really ever see often, or at least when you do, I guess I don't see it successfully installed. 2 would be standard to have on a door. If you have an incredibly light door, you still have its surface area moving that column of air out of its way, and I don't find great success in getting that door to latch with one spring hinge, because at the end of the closing cycle, there's very little stored residual energy in the spring, like there's very little torque, so to speak, to get that door to overcome the friction of the latch to get it to close. So the table is down below there that you can review in the installation instructions. The spring hinge adjustment instructions install spring hinges in the normal manner and oriented for left or right hand doors. This hinge can be installed for either a left hand door or a right hand door. It doesn't matter in that regard. Place the door in the closed position. Insert the hex wrench as shown in figure 1. Rotate it clockwise while viewing from the adjustment end of the hinge, which is here. When you're looking at it this way, and this is pointed towards the top, clockwise. Release the wrench until the locking pin contact. So rotate it a couple of turns, insert a pin. That'll retain the tension on the spring. Then simply test your door. If it's not working correctly, either too strong or too light, change it. Change that tension. I would work the middle hinge first. I'd go to the bottom hinge second. There's some caution here. Use proper safety when installing the spring hinge. By all means, do not overset the tension. If you are hearing creaking in the hinge and you know that you've gone past 4 holes when you get to a 90-degree opening, or 3 holes if you get out to 180 degree, and it's still not working, stop. The spring hinge can break, certainly at that point. And those are the cautions that are there as well. You might not have a door that a spring hinge is really suitable for. And I'm not a fan of spring hinges. I think that they're a Band-Aid. I think they're not the appropriate way to control a door, because they're not really controlling it. They're just getting it to close and latch, hopefully. A door closer with hydraulic control that actually gives you the ability to tailor the speed at which a door closes would be ideal, but there are instances when those are just not possible at all. So spring hinges are a necessary sort of piece of hardware in many instances as well, and are very common as a result. You'll see them very often obviously in hotel room doors, not exclusively, but very often. You'll see them in condo buildings where they have all the unit entry doors. Those are spring hinges, is what they'll do. Okay. So that wraps up everything on this spring hinge. It is fire rated, not that you'd really have that on an 1 3/8 door, but that stamp a lot of people will call and say, well, that's the part number. It's not. That UL rating is just nothing other than a reference to a listing number that could be referred back to the listing company, in this case UL. So if a fire inspector was conducting an inspection on a door, the code states that all of the details of the listed fire-rated hardware have to be obvious. The listing numbers have to be accessible or obvious on the hardware for the inspector's review, and that's all that is. Okay. The thickness of this hinge, this is a 3.5 inch hinge. That hinge leaf thickness, I believe, is 130 thousandths. Let's take a closer look at that on the template. And that is... I do not see the leaf thickness listed there. Oh, forgive me, it's there. 0.131 is the leaf thickness on this. 0.131 inch, that's standard for commercial. If you have any questions on the Hager 1250 3.5 inch spring hinge and prime coat finish or any other Hager product, please feel free to reach out to us. There's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Hager products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the Hager 1250 or any other Hager product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.